The diner was almost empty that afternoon. Only the soft sound of spoons hitting plates and the faint music from the radio filled the room. She moved quickly from one table to another, her apron already stained from the long shift. Life had not been easy for her. The pay was low, the rent kept rising, and every coin in her pocket had to be stretched until it hurt. Still, she carried herself with a kind smile, because deep down she believed kindness always found its way back, even if it took years. That day, when the door opened and two small figures stepped inside, she noticed right away something was different. They weren't like the usual customers who came in for coffee or pie. These were children, thin as sticks, their clothes worn out, and their shoes full of holes. They hesitated near the door, as if afraid someone might chase them away. She could see the way their eyes wandered to the plates on the tables, the way they swallowed hard, their stomachs clearly emptied. Other people inside glanced at them once and quickly looked away. Nobody wanted to bother, nobody wanted to care. But she couldn't take her eyes off them. Something in her heart pulled her toward them. She remembered how hard life could be, and she couldn't imagine children going through that kind of hunger. She walked over gently, bending down so her voice wouldn't scare them. "Are you two all right?" she asked softly. The children didn't answer at first, just lowered their heads in shame. She could see the fear in their faces, as if they expected to be shouted at or told to leave. Instead, she reached out her hand and guided them to a corner booth. "Sit down," she said with warmth. "I'll get you something to eat." The children looked at each other, their lips trembling. One of them whispered, We don't have money." She smiled, even though she knew she barely had enough for her own needs. "Don't worry about that. Today, the food is on me." Her shift was already tough, and she didn't have spare cash to give away, but she walked to the counter, opened her pocket, and pulled out the little money she had saved for her bus ride home. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy 2 meals. She ordered warm soup, bread, and a slice of pie for each of them. When the plates arrived, she placed them gently on the table. The smell of food hit the children, and they froze for a second, almost not believing it was real. Then, with shaky hands, they picked up the spoons and began to eat quickly, as if someone might snatch the food away. She had to remind them to slow down, to breathe, to enjoy the taste. She watched silently, her heart heavy yet full of warmth at the same time. Every spoonful they took felt like a victory over the cruel world outside. She knew she could not change everything in their lives, but at least today, at least for this moment, they were not hungry. As they finished their meals, their eyes shone with tears. They looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. One of them whispered, "We will never forget you." The words were so quiet she almost thought she imagined them, but the way their eyes glistened told her they meant every bit of it. She smiled, brushing it off gently. "Just take care of yourselves," she replied, not knowing how deep those words would sink into their hearts. For her, it was just a small act, something natural, something any decent person would do. For them, it was life-changing. As they left the diner, they turned around one last time, waving shyly before disappearing into the street. She stood by the window for a moment, watching them go, her thoughts lingering on their faces. Life would move on, she knew. There would be more shifts, more bills, more struggles. She didn't expect anything to come out of this moment. She didn't even expect to see them again. But something inside her felt lighter that day. Maybe because she had chosen compassion over indifference. Maybe because she believed even in a world where people looked away, kindness still had a place. She tucked that feeling inside her heart and went back to her work, never realizing that this single act would come back to her in the most unexpected way. Many years later, that afternoon ended like any other shift-tired feet aching back, and a pocket almost empty. But what she didn't know was that in the hearts of those 2 orphans, a promise was planted. A promise that one day, when life gave them the chance, they would return. They would repay the kindness of a woman who had fed them from her own pocket when no one else cared. And though she couldn't see it yet, that promise would come back to her, shining on 4 wheels. 15 years later, the years rolled by quickly. Though for her, every day felt heavy and slow. The diner was still the same, with its buzzing neon sign that flickered at night and the smell of fried food clinging to her uniform. She worked long shifts, sometimes morning to midnight, and still the money was barely enough. Rent ate away most of her pay, groceries took the rest, and some nights she skipped dinner just to stretch what little she had left. Life was a constant battle, but she never let it harden her heart. People often told her she was too soft. That kindness didn't fill a pocket, that helping others only made her life harder. But every time she remembered those children's faces, the hunger, the fear, the way their eyes lit up when they finally tasted warm food, she felt no regret. She knew what it meant to be hungry, to feel invisible. And if she had to choose between being a little poorer or turning her back on someone in need, she would always choose kindness. Still, the weight of her struggles grew heavier with time. Some weeks she worked extra shifts, but even then, she found herself behind on rent. There were moments when she sat alone in her small, dimly lit apartment, staring at the unpaid bills stacked on the table. The silence pressed on her chest. Sometimes she thought of giving up, leaving the city, starting fresh somewhere else. But where could she go? This was the only life she knew. On rainy evenings, when the diner was quiet and customers were few, she often caught herself remembering those 2 orphans. She wondered if they had found a home, if someone had cared for them, or if they were still out there somewhere, struggling the way she was. She never knew their names, never asked where they came from. It had all happened so fast, and she never thought that moment would matter so much. But sometimes, as she poured coffee for strangers, their words came back to her in a whisper. "We will never forget you." She would smile sadly at the memory. Children said things like that, but life was cruel. People forgot. Promises faded. She told herself not to think about it too much, because it only made her heart ache. One night, after finishing a late shift, she walked home through the quiet streets. The streetlights flickered above her, casting long shadows on the wet pavement. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, her hands cold from the evening wind. Passing by a bakery, she caught the smell of fresh bread. It reminded her of the night she bought soup and pie for the orphans. That same ache returned, mixed with a strange warmth. She wondered if they had grown tall by now, if they had survived the storms of childhood, but life didn't give her much time to dwell on memories. The next morning, she was back at work, smiling at customers, carrying heavy trays, pretending her feet didn't hurt. Day after day, she pushed through, holding on to her small belief that kindness had meaning, even if the world around her didn't always show it. There were moments when she felt invisible herself, just another tired worker blending into the background. But sometimes, little things reminded her why she chose to keep her heart open. A stranger would leave her a kind tip. A regular customer would thank her for always greeting them with warmth. And every now and then, she saw hungry faces again, kids, wanderers, people down on their luck, and she couldn't stop herself from slipping them food, even if it meant cutting into her own pay. Her life stayed simple, and often hard, but she carried a quiet dignity that no one could take away. She didn't know it, but somewhere far away, the 2 children she once helped were fighting their own battles. They were growing, struggling, learning to survive in a world that wasn't kind to them. And through every hardship, they carried a memory, the waitress who fed them when no one else cared. She had no way of knowing how much that moment still lived inside them. To her, it was just another day, another act of compassion in a life full of struggle. To them, it was a turning point, a reminder that even when the world seemed cold, kindness still existed. And as she lay in her bed one night, Staring at the cracks on the ceiling, she whispered to herself, "Maybe one day life will surprise me." She had no idea that surprise was already on its way, though it would take years before it arrived, wrapped not in words, but in the gleam of a luxury car waiting outside her home. The years did not slow down for her, though they felt long and heavy. Each morning started the same tired feet sliding into worn shoes, a quick look in the mirror at a face that seemed older than yesterday, and then the long walk to the diner where her shift waited. She had become used to the rhythm, pouring coffee, taking orders, cleaning tables, and forcing a smile even when her heart felt weighed down by worry. Sometimes, when she wiped down an empty booth at the end of the night, she would pause and let her mind drift back to those two small children she had once fed. It had been so long, yet their faces still lingered in her memory. She remembered how their hands shook as they held their spoons, how their eyes softened with relief when they tasted the food. And most of all, she remembered their quiet promise, "We will never forget you." But that was years ago. Life had likely swallowed them up, just as it did to many children without homes. She told herself not to think about it, but sometimes especially. On lonely nights, the memory returned like a whisper, both comforting and painful. Her own struggles were enough to keep her busy. The bills piled up, her body ached more each day, and there were nights she wondered how long she could keep working like this. Yet, even in those low moments, she never regretted what she had done. If anything, she wished she could have done more. One stormy evening, thunder rumbling outside, she sat in her small kitchen with a single candle lit on the table. The power had gone out, and the shadows flickered against the walls. She wrapped her hands around a cup of tea, staring into the steam as her thoughts wandered. She wondered if anyone would remember her when she was gone. She had no family nearby, no husband, no children of her own. Her life felt quiet, almost invisible. The memory of those orphans pressed into her mind stronger that night. She wondered if they were even alive. The world was cruel, and children with no one to protect them often vanished into its darkness. She prayed silently, asking that wherever they were, someone had shown them the same kindness she once did. What she didn't know was that somewhere far away, those children had indeed survived. They had carried her kindness in their hearts like a hidden treasure. On nights when they were hungry, they remembered the taste of warm soup and pie. On days when they felt unwanted, they remembered the gentle smile of the waitress who told them they mattered. That one act, simple as it seemed, gave them the strength to believe in goodness, even when life around them seemed hopeless. They grew older, and though the world tested them with hardship, they held on to determination. One worked small jobs, saving every coin, refusing to let poverty win. The other studied with fierce discipline, fueled by the memory of the woman who told them to take care of yourselves. Her voice had become a guide they carried, a reminder that they were worth saving. As the years passed, their bond grew stronger. They helped each other, lifted each other, and step by step they built a life. They didn't just survive, they began to succeed. And with every achievement, every door that opened, they thought of the woman who had been the first to give them a chance. Meanwhile, back in her little apartment, she had no idea. She thought her act of kindness had been swallowed by time, forgotten like so many things in life. She had no clue that far away, two lives had been shaped, two futures had been built, all because of her. One evening, as she closed the diner after another long shift, she leaned against the counter and sighed. She wondered aloud, did they ever make it? Did they even remember me? She shook her head at herself, thinking it silly. After all, children grow, they forget, life changes, but life had a way of remembering what people thought was forgotten. Those two children had never let go of the promise they made. And though she couldn't see it yet, the day was getting closer, the day when they would return, not as hungry orphans, but as grown adults who carried gratitude in their hearts. and success in their hands. And when that day arrived, it would come not quietly, but in the sound of a car engine purring outside her small home. The morning started like any other. She rose before the sun, her small alarm clock ringing with its usual sharpness. Her bones ached as she slipped into her old shoes and tied her apron around her waist. She didn't expect the day to be any different from the thousands before. Long hours, endless trays, and the walk back to her quiet little home at night. But life has a way of planting surprises when we least expect them. That afternoon, the diner was slow. She wiped down tables, stacked cups, and tried to push away the thoughts of unpaid bills waiting on her kitchen counter. Outside, the weather had cleared after a week of gray skies, and the streets were filled with the usual sounds of honking cars and hurried footsteps. By the time her shift ended, she was exhausted, but she carried on with the same dignity she always had. When she reached her home, a small house on the edge of town, something unusual caught her attention. The sound of a smooth engine humming softly. She froze for a moment, because parked right in front of her house was a car unlike anything she had ever seen up close. Sleek, polished, shining under the evening sun, it was a luxury car, the kind she had only seen in magazines or passing quickly down the city's rich streets. She stood at the gate, unsure what to think. The car door opened, and from it stepped two well-dressed adults. Their clothes looked expensive, their posture confident. Each of them carried a bouquet of flowers, their smiles wide and full of warmth. She blinked, confused, her mind racing. Who could they be? What would people like that want with her? The man approached first, his voice steady but emotional. "Do you remember us?" he asked softly. Her eyes narrowed in confusion. She shook her head at first, but then the woman beside him spoke, her voice trembling with feeling. "You fed us when we had nothing. We were just two children. Hungry, lost. You gave us food from your own pocket." The words hit her like a sudden wind. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at them, searching their faces, and then it struck her. Those eyes, the same eyes she had seen years ago, wide with hunger and pain, were now bright, alive, filled with strength. She gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "It can't be," she whispered. Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped closer. They nodded, smiling through their own tears. "It's us. We never forgot. We promised we wouldn't." Her body trembled, overwhelmed by the realization. These were the orphans she had once fed in a small diner corner so many years ago. She had thought of them often, wondered where life had taken them, but she had never imagined this. Now standing before her, they were no longer the fragile children she remembered. They were strong, successful adults, carrying not just flowers, but a lifetime of gratitude. She wiped at her cheeks, her voice breaking. I never thought I'd see you." Again, the woman stepped forward and gently took her hands. "We made a promise that day. We said we would never forget you. Your kindness gave us hope when we had none. It carried us through the darkest times. Everything we are today started with you." Her knees weakened as emotion overwhelmed her. She led them into her small living room, where the old furniture seemed too humble for guests like these. But they sat down with ease, as if they belonged, filling the room with laughter and memories. She listened as they told her about their journey, how they had worked tirelessly, how they had lifted each other through the years, always keeping her memory alive. They told her how her face would come back to them whenever they felt like giving up. That one act of kindness had been like a flame in the cold, reminding them that goodness still existed. Her heart swelled as she listened, hardly believing it all. She had never thought her small sacrifice that day could ripple out into something so big. But now here, they were living proof that kindness could change lives. When she asked about the car outside, they exchanged a glance and smiled. "It's for you," the man said simply. She stared at them, stunned. "For me?" "Yes," the woman replied, her eyes shining. You gave us food when we had nothing. Today, we want to give you comfort. You gave us dignity when we were lost, and now it's our turn to give back." Her tears flowed freely now. She shook her head, whispering, "I never expected anything in return." "And that," the man said gently, "is why we could never forget you." The evening stretched on with more stories, more laughter, more tears. Outside, the luxury car gleamed, waiting. But to her, the real gift was not the car, it was the return of the two children she had once helped. Now grown, carrying hearts full of gratitude, she had thought she was invisible, forgotten by the world. But on that day, standing in her small home with flowers in her hands and tears on her cheeks, she realized she had made more difference than she had ever imagined. That night felt like a dream she did not want to wake from. Even as she sat in her little living room, with the old clock ticking on the wall and the faded curtains swaying gently in the evening breeze, everything around her felt different. The two faces across from her were no longer strangers, but a living memory returned children she thought she had lost to the world, now sitting before her as grown adults, smiling, grateful and strong. She kept looking at them, afraid that if she blinked too long, they might vanish. "I never thought this day would come," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of emotion. The young man leaned forward, his eyes full of respect. "It came because of you. You don't know what you gave us that day. You gave us more than food. You gave us dignity, hope, and the reason to believe we were worth something." The woman nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "When you used your own money, even though you had so little, it told us we mattered. We held onto that when life was hard. We promised we'd never forget, and we never did." She pressed a hand over her chest, overwhelmed by their words. All her life, she had doubted whether her small kindnesses made any difference. She had wondered if the world even noticed. And yet here they were, telling her that her single act had been the seed of their entire journey. The man stood and walked to the door. She thought he was leaving, but instead, he stepped outside and returned with a small box. Inside it were keys, silver and shining. He placed them in her trembling hands. "This is yours. The car outside, it belongs to you now." Her lips parted, and she shook her head quickly. No, I can't accept this. I never did it for anything in return. I only wanted to help you." "That's why you must accept it," the woman said gently. "Because you gave without expecting anything back. This is not a payment, it's gratitude, it's love. It's us keeping the promise we made." She stared at the keys, her heart racing. Never in her life had she imagined owning something so grand. But more than the car, it was the meaning behind it that struck her deepest. These children, once hungry and forgotten, had returned, not empty, but overflowing with love. Her tears fell freely as she whispered, "I don't deserve this." "You do," the man replied firmly. "Because when no one else cared, you did. And that single choice changed everything for us." The evening turned into a celebration of memories. They shared stories of their struggles, how they supported each other, and how they worked day and night until they found success. They explained how every victory felt like honoring her, because she had been the first to believe they were worth helping. At one point, the woman reached for her hand and held it tightly. "You may not have children of your own," she said softly, "but you are like a mother to us. You gave us life that day." The words broke her completely. She cried, not out of sadness, but from a flood of relief and joy. She had spent so many years thinking she was invisible, forgotten, her sacrifices unseen. But now, in this moment, she realized she had touched lives in a way money could never measure. When they finally stood to leave, the luxury car still waiting outside, she walked with them to the gate. The night air was cool, the stars scattered across the sky. The young man opened the car door and gestured for her to sit inside. Her hands shook as she stepped closer. She could see her reflection in the shiny paint. Her eyes red from tears, but glowing with something new. Hope. She sat in the driver's seat, her heart pounding. The leather was soft, the interior polished. She had never sat in such comfort before. For a moment, she just held the steering wheel, unable to believe it was real. The two stood beside her, smiling. "This isn't just a car," the woman said softly. "It's a reminder that kindness never dies, that love always finds its way back." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I don't care about the car," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What matters is that you came back, that you remembered." They smiled, and in that moment, it felt as though the years of struggle melted away. She wasn't just a tired waitress anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was someone who had planted hope in two broken hearts, and now, 15 years later, she was reaping the harvest of that love. As she watched them drive away after hugging her tightly, she realized that sometimes life hides its blessings until the right moment. And when they finally come, they remind us that even the smallest acts of kindness can echo through time and return in ways we could never imagine. That night, as she stood by the window of her little home, looking at the luxury car parked outside, she whispered to herself, "One act of kindness really can change everything." And she knew now, with absolute certainty, that she had not lived her life in vain.